the Pharisees, Sadducees, the Essenes, and the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Pharisees and the Sadducees were the two most powerful religious and political parties in ancient Judea during the Second Temple period, roughly 150 BCE to 70 CE. They constantly competed for social influence and control over Jewish law. Here is a breakdown of their core identities, beliefs, and differences. The Pharisees, the people's scholars. The Pharisees were a group of middle-class scholars, teachers, and religious leaders. They did not hold hereditary power, but they were highly respected and held the most influence over the general public. The oral law. They believed that God gave Moses two laws at Mount Sinai, the written Torah and an unwritten oral Torah. They used this oral tradition to adapt ancient biblical laws to fit changing modern times. Supernatural beliefs. They fully believed in the resurrection of the dead, the existence of angels and demons, and a life after death with rewards or punishments. Fate and free will : they held a balanced view, believing that God controls human destiny, but individuals still possess personal free will. Legacy. After the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 70 CE, the Pharisees survived. Their emphasis on scripture study and oral tradition evolved into rabbinic Judaism, which is the foundation for all modern forms of Judaism. The Sadducees, the elite aristocracy. The Sadducees were the wealthy, upper-class elite of Judean society. They were heavily made up of the high priests, temple aristocrats, and wealthy merchants who cooperated closely with the ruling Roman authorities. Strict literalism. They rejected the oral law entirely. They believed only the written Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, was authoritative, and they interpreted it with extreme, rigid literalism. No afterlife, because it was not explicitly written in the Torah. They completely rejected the concept of the afterlife, the resurrection of the dead, and the existence of angels or spirits. Absolute free will : they rejected the idea of fate or divine intervention in daily human actions, arguing that humans have total free will to choose good or evil, and that rewards or punishments happen only during one's lifetime. Legacy. Because their entire power base, wealth, and identity were tied directly to temple operations, they completely vanished from history after the Romans destroyed the temple in 70 CE. At a glance comparison. The Essenes. The Essenes were a secretive, highly disciplined Jewish sect that thrived from the 2nd century BCE to the 1st century CE. They were the smallest and most radical of the 3 major Jewish philosophies of the time, opting to separate themselves entirely from mainstream society to live a life of extreme purity. Core beliefs and philosophy. Apocalyptic outlook. They believed the world was deeply corrupt and that a catastrophic final battle between the sons of light themselves and the sons of darkness, everyone else, was imminent. Extreme determinism. Unlike the Pharisees and Sadducees, the Essenes believed in absolute fate. They held that God had predestined everything, choosing who would be saved before the creation of the world. Obsession with purity. They viewed the temple in Jerusalem and its priesthood as corrupted. Instead, they treated their own community as a spiritual temple, enforcing strict dietary laws and practicing constant ritual immersion in water to stay pure. Lifestyle and daily practices. While some Essenes lived in towns, the most famous group established an isolated monastic community at Qumran in the Judean desert. Their daily life was strictly controlled. Communal property. New members had to hand over all their money, property, and clothing to a common pool. There were no rich or poor members. Everything was shared equally. Celibacy and marriage. The desert-dwelling Essenes generally practiced celibacy to maintain spiritual purity and avoid distractions. However, ancient historians note that some regional branches did marry solely to continue their lineage. Strict hierarchy. The community was organized like a military or monastic order. Members were ranked by spiritual maturity, and younger or lower-ranking members had to show absolute obedience to their superiors. Daily routine. They spent their days engaged in manual labor, such as farming or pottery, communal prayer, communal meals eaten in absolute silence, and copying religious manuscripts. Their downfall. The Essenes abruptly vanished from history around 68 CE during the First Jewish-Roman War. As Roman legions marched through the Jordan Valley to crush the Jewish rebellion, they destroyed the settlement at Qumran. Before fleeing or being killed, the Essenes hid their vast library in the nearby limestone caves, where it remained untouched until the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947. The Essenes are the group most widely believed by mainstream scholars to have written and hidden the Dead Sea Scrolls. Why scholars point to the Essenes? The Qumran connection. The scrolls were found in caves directly adjacent to the ruins of Khirbet Qumran. Archaeological evidence suggests this site was occupied by a communal, ascetic Jewish sect during the exact period the scrolls were written, 3rd century BCE to 1st century CE. Matching lifestyles. Ancient historians like Pliny the Elder, Josephus, and Philo wrote about the Essenes, describing them as an isolated, celibate, property-sharing group living near the Dead Sea. This matches the lifestyle rules found inside the scroll's sectarian texts. Ritual cleansing. Qumran contains a large number of mikvahs, ritual baths, and a massive water system. This aligns perfectly with the Essenes' extreme obsession with spiritual purity and daily immersion. The Dead Sea Scrolls are a vast collection of ancient Jewish manuscripts discovered between 1946 and 1956 inside 11 desert caves near Khirbet Qumran, located on the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea. Dating roughly from the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE, these texts represent one of the most critical archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. They offer an unprecedented window into Second Temple Judaism and the historical background of Rabbinic Judaism and early Christianity. Overview of content. The collection includes the remains of roughly 900 to 1,000 distinct manuscripts, which survived primarily as tens of thousands of fragile fragments. They are generally classified into 3 major categories. Biblical texts. About 40% of the scrolls are copies of books from the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament. Fragments of every book have been identified except for the Book of Esther. The Great Isaiah Scroll stands out as the only completely preserved biblical book, predating previous earliest copies by over 1,000 years. Apocryphal texts. Roughly 30% consist of Jewish religious texts not included in the canonized Hebrew Bible, such as the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees. Sectarian documents. The final 30% detail the specific rules, legal viewpoints, and beliefs of a hyper-conservative, apocalyptic Jewish community, widely believed by scholars to be the Essenes. These include the Community Rule and the War Scroll. Key materials and languages. Materials. Most scrolls were written on parchment, refined animal skin, followed by papyrus. A notable exception is the famous Copper Scroll, which was uniquely etched onto metal plates and lists locations of hidden treasures. Languages. The dominant language of the text is Hebrew, but a substantial number of texts are written in Aramaic, with a few composed in Greek. History and preservation. The manuscripts were likely hidden away in clay jars by the local community to protect them from advancing Roman legions during the First Jewish Revolt around 66 to 73 CE. Because of the intensely hot, dry climate of the Judean desert and the absolute darkness inside the limestone caves, the texts survived in isolation for nearly 2,000 years. They were accidentally rediscovered in 1947, when a Bedouin shepherd boy tossed a rock into an opening while looking for a stray goat and heard pottery shattering inside. Current location and access. Today, the vast majority of the original scrolls and fragments are curated by the Israel Museum and housed in the climate-controlled vaults of the Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem. The public can explore high-resolution multispectral scans of the manuscripts globally via the Leon Levy Dead Sea Scrolls Digital Library.